Welcome everybody at Dark Star Magic. Welcome everybody on the internet who has joined us. My name's Erik Arneson. Today I'm teaching a class called The Hidden Code of the Steganographia. So I'll start with a little bit about who I am. I've been studying the occult and I guess practicing the occult since the 1980s, and ceremonial magic in particular since the year 2000, I suppose, or maybe a little bit before. I'm not entirely certain. And I've been really into cryptology, both sort of professionally and as a hobbyist since the late 90s, which is more of on the computer side of things. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we go along. And I run the Arnemancy website, which has a blog and a podcast and things like that. So tonight we're going to talk about the Steganographia by Johannes Trithemius. We're going to talk about its history and how it got to be the weird, mysterious book it is today. We're going to talk about both the magic and the secret codes in the Steganographia, which have been sort of like an object of sort of debate and mystery for a very, very, very long time. We'll talk about where Steganographia research is today. And then the most important part, I think, for people who come to Dark Star Magic classes, how you can use it or what you can do with it. I'm going to talk about sort of the new Skinner-Clark Steganographia and some of the reactions to it that have happened since it's been published. I'm going to talk about what we can do next with the Steganographia to sort of like continue its use in modern occultism and modern practice, and even modern cryptography. Before we get into all of that, I do want to go over some terms just so that we have a little bit of clarity. I know that cryptography is like a really weird topic and sometimes very complicated, and it's a good idea to get an idea of the vernacular of it, of the some of the terms before we start going. But if I start using terms that aren't on these couple of screens and you are wondering what the heck I'm talking about, please stop me and ask what that word means. So a cipher is an algorithm which is either mathematical or described with words that sort of describes a method for transforming a plain text, which is like your message or the thing that the important message, the secret, into a ciphertext, which is the hidden encrypted encoded message. Cryptology in general is just the study of secret codes and ciphers. Cryptanalysis, which I'm not going to talk about a whole lot tonight, but probably a little bit, is the practice of breaking ciphers through various analytical methods. Since the 10th century, we've had a lot of methods that could do this just using hand analysis, like just human people doing analysis. But now we, of course, have computers which are incredible at cryptanalysis and make almost anything you can do by hand pretty much useless when it comes to like really hiding secrets. And then tonight, the two things that we're probably going to focus on the most, the first is cryptography, which is the practice of writing secrets, of doing the encoding and decoding of secrets using a cipher. And then steganography, which is what the Steganographia is about, which is the branch of cryptography where you have messages that are hidden within other messages. And the messages that they're hidden inside look like normal things, right? That you wouldn't expect a message to be hidden inside of. And that's sort of what the Steganographia really focuses on with its methods. So here's an example of steganography. So in this particular cipher, I took the second letter of each word, and there is a message hidden in there. And I know that it's a really stupid sentence, but I was like, well, what am I going to do for this example? But if you look at that, the H and then, the I and his, et cetera, it spells out, hi, class. So hi, everybody. I hope you're having a good time so far. So the Steganographia, like this book has such a legend around it and so many stories around it. And it has been since it was originally written, and it's certainly been helped by the fact that there aren't very many. It's really hard to get a good English translation of it. Up until like last year, there wasn't really a really widely available English translation of this book. So it's always just been this like really mysterious text. And it was over 100 years between when it was written and when it was first published. It was written by Johannes Trithemius in somewhere around 1499, and it spent like an entire century being circulated in manuscript form, and ended up being one of those like mysterious occult texts that was passed around in during the Northern European Renaissance. Trithemius, of course, we'll talk about him in a later slide, but he's mostly, no, I don't know mostly, but one of the things he's famous for is being one of the teachers of Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa. But the Steganographia itself appears on the outside to be a book of like angel magic, it's sort of like a library of angels and how they can be summoned and how they can be communicated with. But it includes all of these like weird lines of nonsense words, or you might call them barbarous words, or invocations in some unknown language that it turns out hide instructions for secret codes. Now, after it was finally published in 1606, which is what, like 80 years after Trithemius died, it was very quickly placed on the Vatican's index of prohibited books, and it stayed there until the year 1900. It's not like, we'll talk about the methods in the Steganographia, and it especially for the year it was originally written in, it's not complex. It's not filled with lots of sigils and magic circles and anything like that. It does purport to be about sort of angelic magic instead of demonic magic. But then if you actually read it, it's on the surface, it's fairly inane. So why are we going to pay attention to it? Why is it something to pay attention to? Is it demonology? Is it magic? Is it cryptography? This is something that scholars fight about a lot and don't seem to agree on very much. And my thought on it is like, it should be both. It is both. And scholars are starting to come around to it. The study, like the actual like scholarly study of Western esotericism is still kind of new, and grimoires are just recently starting to get paid attention to really seriously. There's this fellow named Christopher Lyric who wrote a great book about Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy. And he does address the Steganographia in there, because he talks about that in Agrippa. Well, first of all, he points out some cryptographic ciphers that are in Agrippa's book, but he also talks about like that the practice of like calculating and deriving spirit names in Agrippa is essentially a practice of cryptography. And he then writes, the problem of cryptography and magic is not a simple one. Cryptographic systems are themselves magical ones, in the same way that mathematics, astronomy, and natural philosophy are the fundamental building blocks of occult philosophy. And if you've seen me talk about, or if you've heard me talk about Agrippa's work, you know that Agrippa talked about this quite a bit. In his book 2, he starts off book 2 by talking about how every magician is a mathematician, that magic and math are intimately connected, and that you basically, when you're doing math, you're doing magic. But let's go back to good old Johnny T, Johannes Trithemius. He was a really early character in the Northern Renaissance, and I'm not really sure that he totally fits into the Renaissance as much as like Agrippa and Paracelsus and some of the more 16th century magicians and writers did. But he was a Benedictine monk. He became the abbot of Sponheim. Later on, he became the abbot of St. James Abbey in Würzburg. He got into trouble a lot, but he was also he loved books. He loved books incredibly and amassed this incredible, huge library at Würzburg, something like 2,000 books, which just sounds like a hoarder today, and maybe it was a hoarder then, but 2,000 books that he loved and caused a lot of financial stress for the St. James Abbey. And he kind of got in trouble a couple of times. He really got in trouble when the Steganographia manuscript kind of got circulated. So he had a lot of really strange interests, and steganography and hidden writing and secret writing wasn't all of them. Like, he was definitely some sort of occultist, but he was also very devout. He had sort of an interest in church reform and in improvements and changes that could be done to the Catholic Church. But as you'll see, he died about a year before Luther nailed his theses to the door. That was in 1517. So I don't know that he ever corresponded with Luther or that he ever had any contact with him. Trithemius was a monk and an abbot through and through. So so now let's talk about the contents of the Steganographia. A lot of this book, if you just read it on the surface, it doesn't look that different from other spirit summoning texts, except that it does feel a little out of its time. You know, much of the like the grimoire material that we have that came out of medieval Europe is filled with, you know, swords and daggers and special cloaks and magic shoes and circles that you inscribe on the floor and long involved incantations that are just repeated over and over and over again. And the Steganographia is like really, really stripped down. There is no magic circle on the floor. There is no like prescribed invocation that you have to chant over and over again. There's something about it that just has like a really simple feeling that almost feels like a grimoire that would have been written 100 years later in Protestant Europe. The methods of the Steganographia, I'll show you how, in the next slide, I'm going to get to how the methods are encoded in the Steganographia. But every single method, every single steganographic method is pretty simple and straightforward. It almost always uses the first letters of words, and it has to do with sort of like counting. Here are the words you keep, here are the words you skip. But the descriptions for the methods are encoded in a much different way. And I know that this looks very confusing. Let me explain this. So this is the invocation of Camuel, who is one of the angels that is listed in the Steganographia. I have changed the capitalization so you can kind of see where the hidden message is. But the way that these messages are encoded in these strings of barbarous words or nonsense words is you take every other word, skipping the first one, you smash all those words together, and then you take every other letter in that resulting jumble of letters, and that spells it out. Now, each of these instructions are written in a pidgin of hold on, let me just show you how that looks. So you've got basically every other word, right? The words that have little capital letters in them. You smash them all together in a string, and it looks like this. And then if you strip out just the capital letters, which is basically every other letter in that, you get primum vacat alternat. Every single invocation, every single angelic invocation in the Steganographia has a method like this encoded. And every single one of them, this one is all Latin, but most of them are this weird pidgin of Latin and early New High German. So some of them will have sort of like German instructions and Latin nouns or things like that, which is strange, but it's honestly not that difficult to read if you know the languages a little bit. This particular one says primum vacat alternatum, which means alternate words beginning with, but the first word is idle. And that's terminology used by Silenus, who we'll talk about in a little bit. So basically, this is one of the most simple ones, where basically you're just sort of skipping every other word. You take the first letter, and altogether those make the message. And then they get more and more complicated. Sometimes they require you take one word, skip two, get the next word, skip two, skip the next one. And then as you get later and later in the book, it's going to be like, okay, the first time around you take one word, skip one. Then you take one word and skip two. Then you take one word and skip three. Some of them go all the way through the message and then turn around and come back through it from the other direction. Some of them get just a little bit too crazy to actually be practical or usable in any way when you're communicating with another person. Some of them require counting syllables. Some of them require like extra idle words after one plain text word is finished, which is almost impossible to do unless you know what the message already is. Some of them require idle words at the ends of sentences, which is also incredibly impossible to do if you don't know what the plain text message is. So a lot of them are easy to do when you're encoding a message, but almost impossible to do when you're decoding. And then when you add to that, in the original text of the Steganographia, either in the manuscript or in the original printing, either Trithemius, his editor, or his printer garbled the ciphertext, so we aren't able to really verify what he was trying to describe. This is made even more difficult by the fact that Silenus, who I'll talk about him in a minute, but he's the one who figured out how all of these hidden messages were hidden. And I feel like sometimes he kind of made up his interpretations. I'm not really sure that he always was getting it right. I'll talk about that in a little bit too. But this particular algorithm, this particular cipher, hold on, this was Camuel. So here's an example of how Camuel works. So in this sentence, you'll see that every other word, I've taken the first letter of that word, and that's how it's, that's the encoded message. And so once again, you can see that the H in his, the I in introduction, the C in clease, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It spells out high class. And that's one of the simplest methods. And not all of them are even are that easy, but honestly, none of them are. Most of them are not that difficult. All right, so the Steganographia, like, how did we figure this out? Like, it's weird, you know, the method, the way that all of those methods are sort of like encoded in these incantations and in these barbarous words is like a really strange thing, and somebody figured it out and somebody published it. So let's talk a little bit about that. I do want to talk a little bit about the Steganographia itself. It's a big work. You know, it's published in 4 books. A lot of the text is kind of like missing or gone in most of the published works. Most of the steganographic methods that I'm talking about tonight are all in the first book of the Steganographia. And there's kind of a history of people like looking at this book and not knowing what to make of it. One of the first people I want to talk about is Giambattista della Porta. He wrote about steganography, you know, after Trithemius' death. He wrote about cryptography and steganography. Supposedly, his book De Furtivis Liberatum or Literatum Notis contains some commentary on the Steganographia. There is no English translation of it, and the only Latin version I could get that I can get of it is in PDF form, and it's not OCR'd, and I haven't gone through the entire thing. But I've tried, and I haven't actually found any mention of Trithemius or the Steganographia yet. But he has all sorts of interesting stuff about cipher disks and substitution ciphers, and even like some sort of musical substitution cipher that I would really love to figure out, but I have not tried. But Solanus, who I've mentioned a couple times now, he's sort of the fellow who really cracked the code. He's an interesting character. He was the August II, Duke of Brunswick-Lüneburg. He also lived after the time of Trithemius, and wrote under a pseudonym on all sorts of amazing things. Like he was basically, I mean, he was a brilliant nerd. He sort of dug into the Steganographia, or perhaps got information from somebody who knew the Steganographia really well, and wrote this book whose name I will attempt to say as long as everybody agrees to laugh at me. The Cryptomenetiques et Cryptographiae Libri Novum. I mean, it's no Hypnerotomachia Polyphili. He really dug in. So in the original printed version of the Steganographia, Trithemius actually has these example letters that like they're sort of like letters that are written with some of the different ciphers that sort of show how the ciphers are used, and Solanus sort of sat down and worked with those and figured out how everything worked, and then included it all in his giant 9-volume work. He's also the one that discovered that Trithemius messed up with some of his more complicated ciphers, or the printer messed up. We don't know which. But I've been looking at a lot of Trithemius's ciphers, and especially as he gets later on, like there's a bunch of them in the book. Some of the later ones look like they might not actually work at all. So it's possible that Trithemius just got a little excited and didn't actually test everything. It's possible that some of Trithemius's ciphers were meant entirely for magical work and not for communicating with other people at all. We'll talk about that in a little bit, about how they can be used and how that works. And again, almost all of Solanus's work was about the ciphers that are in Book 1 of the Steganographia, which is where all of the angelic magic is. Now, maybe that's Book 1 and 2. Anyhow, Book 3 of the Steganographia is a super weird one. I mean, has all these tables of numbers and things like that nobody is able to figure out for centuries. But this genius Jim Reeds figured it out. He this paper that he wrote, the solved the ciphers in Book 3 of Steganographia, is not incredibly long, and it's pretty fascinating to read. He discovered that Trithemius had invented a sort of Vignere cipher, which is like a numeric word-based cipher that, again, he kind of screwed up a little bit, but it's disguised as astrological tables in the Steganographia, and it's kind of brilliant, but it's also extremely complicated. So I'm not going to cover how these work tonight. I would advise you, if you really want to know, read his paper and take a look at it. If you get Skinner's new edition of the Steganographia, it's got all the number tables in it, so you can dive in and figure it out on your own. But it's a pretty complicated hand cipher. There's apparently another scholar named Thomas Ernst who also decoded Book 3 in the late 90s, working independently of Jim Reeds, but I haven't been able to find very much good information about him or his work. So I don't have a slide for him, and I don't have a little picture of him either. We also have a number of modern occultists who have worked on the Steganographia or worked towards bringing us the information from the Steganographia. But the problem that we're running into with this is that attempts to understand Renaissance cryptography as it was used in magic are it's a problem of it being a split between two disciplines. Like, we have the discipline of the history of Western esotericism and Western occultism, which is still fairly new and incredibly amazing, but it's mostly scholars who are focused on the humanities side of things. On the cryptography side of things, on the cryptology side of things, cryptologists are stuck in this sort of like arms race between cryptography and cryptanalysis, where everybody's always trying to make better math to make better ways of encoding secrets, or break the better math so that they can decode other people's secrets. So there are very few cryptologists who are actually looking backwards at the history of cryptology. So the problem is there just isn't a whole lot of overlap between occultists and cryptologists. There aren't very many of us. And the end result is that, people, like Jim Reeds will publish his paper and it'll be amazing, but it doesn't get very much attention because there aren't cryptologists looking at historical stuff, and there aren't scholars of Western esotericism looking at cryptology and math. And I believe that this causes a certain amount of suffering and misunderstanding when it comes to those of us who love grimoires and love Renaissance magic and love some of these like amazing giant brains from the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries that we'd love to study and read and whose footsteps we want to follow in. So we do need more people looking at these secret codes and figuring out how all of this stuff works, because the secret codes are important. All right, so the first fellow I want to talk about is Adam McLean. I don't know if any of you have heard of him. He's got a great website whose name I just forgot. I probably should have put it on this slide. He's got an alchemy website that he's been keeping up to date since the 90s that is filled with alchemical texts. He collects alchemical images and alchemical texts, and he either translates things himself or funds translations. In the early 80s, he started publishing this series called the Magnum Opus Hermetic Source Works, where he would find alchemical and magical texts that hadn't been translated, and then he would get them translated, and he would do these sort of like custom bindings. I've got my Steganographia right here. It was from 1982. There were only 500 of them. They were all hand bound. They're made with printer paper and some sort of weird vegan leather, and it's falling apart. But I came across this book. I feel like I might have left out part of my story here. I probably should have talked about in the about me slide. But so I came across the Steganographia in the early 2000s. Let me talk about a little bit more about this translation. It's translated by two people named Fiona Tate and Christopher Upton. I haven't been able to find very much good information on the two of them, but it was published in 82, so who knows where they are or what they are. And this includes Walden's translation of Silenus, which I didn't mention back here. So Silenus, his book, was published in 1624, and it was while it might have been really influential at the time, or it might have been really cool at the time, it did end up getting mostly ignored. But in 1900, J.W.H. Walden made a translation of it. It was never published, but you can find scans of the manuscript on archive.org, which is really wonderful. Oh, maybe it's. So anyhow, this version of the Steganographia includes Walden's translation of Silenus, so all of the decoded codes were in here. I thought that was kind of what everybody was after with Steganographia. It's like, what are the codes? How did the hidden codes work for all of the different angels? But this book, the Steganographia, was a real eye-opener for me. So I became involved in sort of like the cypherpunk movement and the cryptography, like underground cryptography movement in the 90s, when there were anonymous remailers and PGP and all that kind of stuff. And I attended my first DEF CON. DEF CON is a conference for computer hackers. I attended DEF CON 11. And at DEF CON 11, I met the people who created Tor, the onion router. I met people that I'd worked with on anonymous remailer stuff, people that I'd worked with on like open source cryptography stuff. And I mean, it was mind blowing. You know, I didn't at the time realize how little I knew. So it was one of those sort of like, I had been a big fish in a little pond and I hadn't realized that there was an ocean yet. But meeting these people, hearing the way they thought about these sorts of problems and the way they thought about secrets in cryptography and all this sorts of stuff just blew my mind. And I realized at the time that I'd already been sort of deep into my occult journey as well. I realized at the time that there had to be some sort of connection, right? The occult is about secrets. Cryptography is about secrets. Cryptology is about secrets. And we know that there is this whole change in worldview that happened after the Reformation, after the Protestant Reformation and all that kind of stuff that changed the way we viewed the ordinary world. Like we allowed the sacred to escape. The ordinary world stopped being universally sacred. But back in the 1500s, every single scholar we had was also devoutly religious, and we know from their writings that they treated everything around them as sacred, including the way that math worked, including the way that language worked, and the way that alphabets worked. And so I was like, where's the connection? Why is nobody talking about this? I am still asking that question, even though I'm here talking about it right now. But this particular Steganographia was the one that really sort of set me on this path. Like, nobody was talking about it. I couldn't find anybody to talk to it about. One of the Tor developers, Nick M., he was kind of into some interesting esoteric stuff. So we had some really amazing conversations that, he didn't. There was just nothing. I waited and searched and tried to figure stuff out, and it's been a frustrating couple of decades. Then last year, Stephen Skinner worked with Daniel Clark to publish a new translation of the Steganographia. It's right here on the shelf. It's big and yellow, like all of Stephen Skinner's books. So this translation is actually a translation of a translation. It's a translation of a French manuscript of the Steganographia. And there's parts of it that are great, right? Like all the invocations are there, all the instructions are there, all of the tables and the diagrams and all that stuff are there. But there's nothing about the secret codes. In fact, Skinner purposely didn't include them. So the whole underlying part of the steganographic magic is missing from Skinner's translation. And unfortunately, since McLean's translation was such a tiny publishing run and will never be available again, it's all we have for English materials, unless you were lucky enough to get one of the McLean editions. And in fact, so Skinner in interviews that I've heard, he talks about using the methods of the Steganographia, but he doesn't use the secret codes. And he says that it's frustrating and that he's gotten it to work, but it's awful. And if you want to do things like this, you should just use email. But he seems to have little or no understanding of how the secret codes work or what they're doing there or what Trithemius was talking about in his actual instructions. Anyhow, this particular translation, while I have it, and I think that it's a very gorgeous book, and it's very useful, and it's the only English edition that any of us are going to be able to get their hands on, I also find it very, very frustrating that he published this Steganographia that is basically unusable since it doesn't have any of the secret codes in it.
I mean, does it not have the barbarous words?
It has the barbarous words, but if you want to get the secret codes, you have to decode them yourself and then translate them yourself, and then figure out what the heck they mean. So it's a problem. But I've I've started cataloging all of them. So I have all of that stuff available in mostly easy to read stuff that I'm happy to share with anybody, with all of you. In addition, Skinner, there are a number of other problems with his edition where he actually, so the French manuscript that he used includes a lot of material that's not by Trithemius. It sort of feels like it's more in the tradition of like Solomonic or Goetic magic. And Skinner kind of focuses a little bit too much on that stuff, which makes sense. It's what he loves, but I'm not sure that it's what Trithemius wanted. Trithemius wanted it to be about angel magic. So while unfortunately it's the only version we have, and it is a gorgeous book, I don't think that that book is extremely usable right off the shelf. So let's talk about how the Steganographia is used. Now, I'm kind of distilling all of this out of my reading of the Steganographia and my work with it over the last 20 years, and basically just following the instructions that it has in it. This particular thing here, I know it looks like a magic circle, but this is actually from Skinner's Steganographia. It's a chart that shows the direction you're supposed to be facing in when you work with specific angels and specific codes in the book. Since it's angel magic, it doesn't seem like there's any magic circle you're supposed to face on the floor. And the magic of the Steganographia might be a little bit more limited than stuff you'll find in other grimoires, but every single one of the angels will have its own sort of, role and things that it can do. I'll talk about that in the next slide. But just sort of in general, you can use the Steganographia to communicate with friends of yours who are also using the Steganographia. Like, it totally has methods for doing that. It can be used to write petitions to spirits or angels. It can be used to encode magical workings, sort of like Difficciones, but like, cooler and more secret. It can be used to record secret notes in your magical journal. And it can be used to accompany other cryptographic magical methods, such as some of the sigil methods that I talked about in my other classes on cryptography and magic. So the first thing you do when you're using the Steganographia is you pick an angel, and this requires the first book of the Steganographia is very much like a spirit catalog. You flip through it, and it'll be like, this angel is good if you're trying to conquer a country. This angel is good if you're trying to, keep family and friends safe from harm. This angel is good if you, so it's very much like other spirit catalogs when it comes to that, where every single one of them kind of has its own sort of duties. All of them have angelic names. There are a few that don't have the L suffix, but very few. And each one of them, like other spirit catalogs, will have a title. They're going to be like a duke or a prince or something of that nature, and they'll have lists of like spirits under them and numbers of spirits that you can work with and all that kind of stuff. A lot of that just feels very, very much like other spirit catalogs and spirit grimoires. So the first thing you do is you pick the angel, figure out what the cipher is for that angel, either by doing it yourself, by grabbing it out of the barbarous names, or looking at a list like the one that I'm slowly putting together. So for the ritual itself, you're going to need some nice paper because you're going to be writing things down. You're going to need a red pen and a black pen. The Steganographia is very clear about this. You're going to need an altar. And if you don't have a very good sense of direction, you might need a compass so that you know which direction you're supposed to face in. And then, even though the Steganographia doesn't really mention it, I think you could probably add some incense and candles because those always make magic better. The opening ritual involves, invoking God. The Steganographia doesn't have like an actual prayer in it, but this is something that you can either take from another grimoire or just write yourself or do yourself with prayers you already know. Consecrate your working space with whatever method you usually use with opening rituals. And then the important thing, one of the things that the Steganographia is really specific about, is that you have to face the correct direction. for the angel you're working with. Now, ahead of time, here are some thoughts that I kind of have on this. So, like ahead of time, you should have the message that you want to write. Like if you are using this to communicate with a friend, have the plain text of the message already written out. If you're writing a petition or a spell, like have the plain text written out on something that you can burn and get rid of, right? Because you don't want that plain text to ever exist again. And then you go through the encoding process. Now, according to the Steganographia, when you're doing the encoding, you recite the invocation, which is the barbarous words, the sort of weird nonsense characters, the nonsense words that actually have the cipher encoded in it. So you recite that invocation. You use your red pen to draw the sigil of the angel on your piece of paper, and then you work on encoding your text using the algorithm, using the cipher for that angel. This is not always going to be an easy task. You know, you might have to take a couple passes at it. You might have to actually take a lot of time to encode and get everything done. And then make sure that after you're done with the encoding method, you destroy the original so that nobody can see your secret message again. If you are on the receiving end of a secret steganographic message, you will have basically like a piece of paper with an angelic sigil on it, written in red. You will look through the Steganographia and find the correct angel using that sigil. And then you'll basically do the other thing. There's always a second invocation, a second set of barbarous words for every angel. It's kind of goofy. It's always the same algorithm, spelled out a little bit differently in a different block of barbarous words. But you get the same method. So you do the same thing. You recite the invocation, and then you contemplatively decode the ciphertext and get the message out of it. You do have to pay a little bit of attention. Some of the angels have like other instructions. Like one of them, hold on, where is that note? Camuel, the angel whose example I used earlier, there's actually a little sentence in there that says that when you recite the invocation, you do it silently. But not all of them say that. Some of them will have other instructions. So, pay attention to that part. And then once you have either encoded your ciphertext or decoded the plain text message, the secret message, you do a closing ritual. And I just use the same thing I always use. There's no prescribed ritual in the Steganographia. You thank the spirits, do a little closing prayer, and then a license to depart. Now, the Steganographia, everything in there is sort of like part of the family of ciphers in cryptology that we call a hand cipher. It's something that you can encrypt and decrypt by hand. You don't need a computer to do it. You can just do everything using your own brain in the normal span of an hour or so. It just takes a little bit of work. So what this means is that, like, if you're using the Steganographia to encode things, don't use these methods for keeping secrets that are going to be threatening to your life or the life of somebody you care about. These are not methods that are used to keep like state secrets. You have to know why you are encoding. Like it's a magical ritual, right? You are doing this as sort of an act of devotion and magic and contemplation, not as an act of like real isn't the right word. Not in the act of like, hiding your secrets from the NSA. The Steganographia will never hide your secrets from the NSA. All hand cryptography can be cracked with computers. In addition, some of the Steganographia ciphers, especially as you get later and later in the spirit list, get so weird that they probably won't be useful or even usable for communicating with another person. In other words, they might be just sort of one-way ciphers where you can encode a message, but nobody else will ever be able to decode it. You probably will, since you know what the message is, but other people might not be able to, or might have a lot of difficulty in decoding them. In addition, some of the ciphers aren't described very clearly, or might be broken in some other ways. So Solanus, everybody relies on Solanus's interpretation of Trithemius's words in the ciphers. And sometimes the way Solanus interprets things, I look at the original text and I'm like, I don't know if that's what he actually said. So there's still a little bit of work to be done figuring out exactly what some of the ciphers actually say and what they mean. Because it seems like sometimes Solanus was making some guesses. They were educated guesses. Solanus was a very, very smart guy. But given the fact that the texts themselves in the Steganographia are kind of garbled, it's hard to know if he's right or if he's just sort of like, pretty sure this is what Trithemius meant, let's just go with it. So there's definitely work to be done in figuring out some of the more complex ciphers. So those are some things to keep in mind. But the first couple dozen angels in the Steganographia have excellent ciphers that are very, very easy to use, very easy to encode and decode with, and should cover most of your needs. It's only when you get to the later stuff that it starts to get pretty weird. So recently, as I was working with the Steganographia, I got this weird bug up my ass to write some software for it. So I'm going to get a little nerdy here. You can ignore me or throw fruit or whatever if you feel like it. But so one of the things that I did is I wrote a grammar to try to describe the codes of the Steganographia, and then I wrote some software to interpret that grammar. It's written in Clojure. I used Bacchus-Naur form. Which is a method of describing computer languages. So I tried to sort of like break it down in that way. Some of the ciphers do get a little weird and complicated. I know that this is, unless you are a computer programmer, this is probably all a lot of gobbledygook. You don't need this. What I'm trying to do with this is create a method of being able to like check other texts to see if Steganographia codes have been used to encode secret messages in other grimoires or other writings of Trithemius. And all of this work is available online. Here's the URL. I know that's not easy to use, but I will happily share it with anybody. You can just drop me an email or yeah. And it's written in Clojure. I used extended Bacchus-Naur form. Bacchus-Naur. So John Bacchus was one of the people who invented ways of writing about computer programming languages. One of my computer programming heroes. And I have John Bacchus's old chair. It's like I feel like it's sort of my most powerful magic artifact. I sit in it sometimes. I think it makes me smarter. Maybe not. So it's still a work in progress. I haven't actually done anything with it yet to see if I can find hidden messages in other texts, but I'm working on it, and it's kind of getting there. And then the other thing, like, if y'all are interested enough in this stuff to show up and listen to me talk about this for a little while, I would like to invite you to come and help me figure this stuff out a little bit more, because nobody's working on this. The most serious Trithemius Steganographia thing we've had in the last 40 years has been somebody who's like, oh, I didn't include the secret codes. Nobody cares about that shit. So please, this is an invite to my Discord server. Come and join it. We'll practice using magical ciphers with each other and write each other's secret notes. And then we'll figure out what the broken ciphers are supposed to say. Like we'll see what all of that stuff is about. And so that's what I've got for the Steganographia. I would love to hear some. This is the same invite link, but I would love to hear questions, comments. Yes.
I have a question about. I noticed you were listing all the editions and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You did not mention Friar Asher's Black Abbot like magic?
I didn't. That's a really good book, and it is about Trithemius and about some of Trithemius's work, but it's not about the Steganographia. It doesn't go into it at all. I really loved that book, and I got it because I was sort of like, oh my God, somebody's writing about Trithemius, and I was sad that it didn't get into the Steganographia, but it is a good book. Trithemius was a well-read human, and he wrote a lot about a lot of different things, and that is a pretty good one. But it's not. I don't think that it's got any secret codes in it, from what I can tell.
One of our online people had several questions while you were going on those.
Okay. So let's see. We've got first question. Angel invocations consist of saying the barbarous words while knowing the hidden code. The instructions in the Steganographia indicate that you're supposed to say the barbarous words. You're not supposed to say the hidden code out loud. Okay, there are a bunch of questions here. Okay, the next question. How does the encoding contribute meaningfully to the occult practice and philosophy? Well, okay, so that's, I think, one of the things that I really want to get across is that everything, so to a Renaissance magician, everything was sacred, right? So the way that language worked, the way that you could use language to hide other language, that was a sacred thing, and it was literally occult. It was hidden, right? Occult means hidden, so it was literally part of the occult practice and the occult philosophy. And then the next question: does this relate at all to the cryptography of Kabbalah? This particular practice doesn't. The Kabbalah does have cryptography in it, probably the most famous being the Atbash cipher, which is a substitution cipher. But also in 3 books of occult philosophy, there is sort of a shifting substitution cipher using Hebrew that Agrippa lays out. And then the next question is the Caesar cipher used in this grimoire? No, not at all. Yes.
I had a couple of things. One is levity.com, Adam McLean.
That's it.
I fully endorse Adam McLean. He is totally awesome.
He is awesome. I agree.
Then the second thing is, so what I feel like I'm getting out of this is, if you're going to use this, one would make their preparations, read the invocation or the barbarous words, and then within the barbarous words are instructions for encoding your message. That message would either go to the angel for what you want them to do, and or to your friend that's going to decode it.
Exactly. Okay. Yes. Thank you for clarifying. Okay, and then the next question is: every angel in the catalog has its own cipher? Yes. And then, if someone wanted to learn more about this era of code, occult and/or not, where would you point them? I have that exact same question. Honestly, like, there aren't very many people writing about it. You can find some papers. Jim Reed's paper is good. There's a little bit of stuff in writings about Agrippa that's pretty good. A lot of it gets ignored or just sort of tossed away. Enochian people who are studying John Dee deal a little bit with some of the encryption that John Dee was using. But there aren't a lot of places to go. That's the big problem. Yes. Yes.
Question about the angel names.
The
angel names in the book, are they unique to this work, or can you find them in other historical grimoires?
I haven't checked every single one of them. I think Skinner has a chart where he talks about where there are some overlaps. So there are some overlaps, but not all of them. Yeah.
Why was the book banned? And then why was it released?
Well, it was banned because it was a book of magic, and the Catholic Church was extremely anti-magic.
Okay, so it was just part of, like, all the books on magic were banned.
Yeah. But this one in particular, it was written by a Benedictine abbot, so it was seen as, like, even more scandalous. And I don't know why it was released. It was 1900. The Catholic Church was probably sort of like, oh no, look, we're not bad guys. You have to remember, in the year 1900, that was what, 12 years after the end of the Italian Civil War, Catholic Church was in a pretty low spot. So I don't know. Who knows? I'm not sure. I can't pretend to know the mind of the Pope. Yes.
Another question about the angel name. So I'm just asking this question to make sure I understand. Are there some angels, barbarous words that have not currently been decrypted or decoded, and that essentially makes them off limits?
All of the barbarous words in book 1 or book 1 and book 2, like all of the angelic invocations, they're all decodable. Yeah, we've decoded all of them.
Okay, so then what's in book 3 and book 4 then?
Book 3 is the weird substitution cipher, numeric cipher that I talked about that Jim Reed worked on. And that's something completely different. That's a method of encryption that I don't have anything prepared for. And then book 4 maybe didn't have anything in it. The book 4 that Skinner includes in his Steganographia was probably written by somebody else. Any other questions or anything? All right. It says subtractione ex lapida fit mercurius. It means remove the stone and you will find mercury. It's sort of like, describing the practice of stone carving, but I just think it also has like this nice, weird, mysterious feel to it.
Well, thanks
All right.
for a great presentation.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, online people. Go to darkstarmagic.com and buy some books.